On the afternoon of June 30th, 2024, a rocket slowly ascended into the sky over Gongyi City, Henan Province, trailing a long plume of smoke. However, as it reached a certain altitude, the smoke from the rocket's tail suddenly disappeared. The rocket, having lost power, then plummeted sharply and eventually crashed into the deep mountains 1.5 kilometers southwest of the test site, where it disintegrated upon impact. According to local residents, the rocket crashed near Shuezhuang village, only 3 kilometers from the city center and just 1 kilometer from the high-speed railway line. Gongyi City is located between Zhengzhou and Luoyang to the west. The city's #1 high school, situated 5 kilometers west of the explosion site, experienced significant damage. The restaurant's glass windows shattered, and the ceiling of the sports office collapsed, and even the glass in the senior teaching building and girls' dormitory was not spared. The wall's plaster also peeled off. The dramatic scenes of the rocket's launch and crash were quickly captured by sharp-eyed locals and rapidly spread online. Many netizens expressed their confusion. Gongyi City has no rocket launch site. Some questioned whether it was an accident involving the rocket force, while others suspected a mishap by the aerospace department. There were calls for relevant authorities to clarify the facts, lest people think a missile had struck. Under intense public scrutiny and pressure, the involved parties finally broke their silence. Space Pioneer, also known as Beijing Tianbin Technology Company Limited, released a statement on their official WeChat account revealing the truth behind the accident. At 3:43 p.m., the company's self-developed Tianlong-3 liquid rocket was undergoing a test at its test center in Gongyi City, Henan Province. The purpose was to check if the 9 engines of the first-stage rocket could work together normally. While the rocket did ignite properly, an issue occurred with the fixture holding the rocket in place, causing it to launch. After reaching mid-air, the rocket's computer shut down automatically, resulting in the rocket crashing into the mountains 1.5 kilometers southwest of the launch pad and breaking into pieces. Fortunately, no one was injured. An image surfaced showing the rocket being secured with several bolts on what appeared to be a scaffold-like platform, which seemed quite rudimentary. When SpaceX conducts static fire tests, multiple steel cables anchor the rocket, along with ground anchor bolts and a weighted cap at the top, ensuring 120% tethered strength to guarantee the rocket doesn't take off during static fire. In previously released photos by Space Pioneer, the rocket's top lacked any steel cable restraint devices connecting it to the ground. Interestingly, a screenshot of a WeChat conversation was shared, where someone asked the on-site technicians why they used a few bolts to secure the rocket instead of a reinforced concrete platform, relying on gravity to hold the rocket down. The technicians reportedly responded that the weight of the fully fueled rocket alone was enough to prevent it from flying away. The issue is that this approach only works for the first 30 seconds of ignition. Beyond that, the weight of the fuel alone can't keep the rocket grounded. This time, it seems they failed to shut off the engine in time. If this conversation is true, then it was reckless to save money and rush the process. A netizen revealed, "I told the boss from the beginning that using steel cables to secure the rocket wasn't enough. We needed more cables, but the boss wouldn't listen, saying, 'Where can we get more cables right now? It would take us a trip to the city, and they wouldn't be there until tomorrow. Tomorrow is July 1st. We can't delay into July. We must do the ignition test today. There's no time left.' So when the 9 engines ignited simultaneously, the thrust was too great, and the test stand couldn't hold the rocket. It took off. After the rocket took off, the ground control personnel reacted well, shutting down the engines in time to let the rocket crash. If they had been a few seconds later, the rocket could have reached the sky over Gongyi City, where a large explosion could have occurred upon impact due to the remaining fuel, causing unimaginable consequences. This absurd incident is unheard of and completely violates basic safety principles in the aerospace industry, making it a huge joke. What is most baffling is why the rocket test platform was built so close to residential areas. On the left is the Falcon 9 during its test, and on the right is the Tianlong-3 during its test. Within a 2-kilometer radius, there are 4 natural villages, and 3 kilometers away is Gongyi City's residential area. An 800-ton thrust rocket without counterweights and steel cables Who gave Space Pioneer the confidence to not set these up? This negligence is criminal. In the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration would bury you with the regulations, but in China, as long as you have connections, you can do whatever you want, wherever you want. The safety of the common people often gets left by the wayside. Such irresponsible site selection, coupled with the technical errors mentioned earlier, fully exposes the severe lack of safety awareness in the aerospace industry in China. What's more troubling is the official response after the accident. The local government casually referred to it as a rocket test flight. Such a major accident endangering public safety should be thoroughly investigated, and the truth should be made public, not dismissed. However, under the Chinese Communist Party's rule, covering up the truth and deceiving the public is the usual course of action. The protagonist of the story, the Tianlong-3 rocket, has a similarly laughable backstory. The Tianlong-3 claimed it could compete with SpaceX's Falcon 9. Tianlong-3 is developed by China's so-called leading private aerospace company, Space Pioneer. They boasted that the first stage of the rocket could not only land vertically, but also be reused 10 times. Doesn't that sound like the Falcon 9? However, in their rush to catch up with international standards, they seem to have forgotten the most basic safety rules. To save time and costs, they didn't use a standard concrete launch pad to secure the rocket. This short-sighted approach reminds one of the industry jargon often used by some Chinese companies. Early planning is essentially preparing to plagiarize. Years of dedication means waiting for open source. Overtaking on a curve indicates the open source opportunity has arrived. Far ahead means successful plagiarism, and bottlenecked signifies a failed attempt at copying. Space Pioneer claims it wants to surpass SpaceX, which clearly marks their attempt at overtaking on a curve on their way to far ahead. However, their safety measures are so haphazard that they haven't even done the fundamental groundwork. As a result, their rush to overtake has led to this unexpected first flight. On June 11th, they enthusiastically transported the rocket from Zhangjiagang to Gongyi. In their haste to prepare for the maiden flight in Wenchang in September, they were desperate to complete the static fire test by the end of June. The result? It was an embarrassing performance. A netizen sarcastically remarked, "At least they proved that thrust is greater than weight." Indeed, this must be the only noteworthy achievement of this farce, but even if the thrust is greater than the weight, it doesn't mean you should let the rocket take off during a ground test. Space Pioneer completed 12 rounds of financing in just 4 years, with its valuation soaring to over 15 billion yuan, which is utterly fantastical. How can a company only 5 years old be valued so highly? It's all thanks to boasting and grand promises. This mindset of rushing to succeed is particularly prominent under the CCP's high-pressure policies. The government pursues short-term achievements, companies chase short-term profits, and investors look for short-term returns. Everyone is racing frantically, and as a result, accidents happen. In the high-speed aerospace industry, this mentality is especially dangerous. Look at Elon Musk's SpaceX, which took nearly 20 years to achieve its current success. And yet Space Pioneer arrogantly thinks it can catch up in 5 years. Ultimately, the biggest victims of this accident are ordinary people. The rocket crash site was only a few kilometers away from residential areas. Imagine if the rocket's trajectory had deviated slightly and hit a residential area. Even more astonishing is that the rocket crash site was reported to be only about 1 kilometer away from the high-speed railway line. In a normal country, such a dangerous experiment would never be conducted next to critical transportation infrastructure. This oversight suggests that someone powerful is backing this venture. What's even more infuriating is that the local residents didn't even receive a proper explanation after the accident. The local report blandly mentioned no casualties, but who will compensate for the shattered glass, the terrified elderly, and the children? Who will heal their psychological trauma? In the eyes of the CCP, their only concern is to quickly calm the situation, maintain so-called stability, and cover up the truth while deceiving the public. This approach essentially tells the world, in China, rockets can fly around uncontrollably, but the truth must never be revealed. This absurd phenomenon is closely related to the unique power structure and network of interests in China. Space Pioneer is a private enterprise, but under China's system, any large private enterprise is basically a white glove or government-backed private firm. Which of the companies that receive such enormous investments doesn't have deep political connections in China? Space Pioneer was founded by a former Rocket Force project scientist and an advanced individual from the Rocket Force. Major investors in Space Pioneer include Bohua and CCTV Fund, likely suggesting some high-ranking officials' offspring are profiting behind the scenes. This explains why such an immature project dared to conduct high-risk experiments near residential areas. After all, if something goes wrong, the party and the government will back them up, and it's the civilians who suffer. Netizens' sarcastic remarks hit the nail on the head, comparing this to Kerbal's space program in real life. Kerbal Space Program, or KSP, is a space simulation game where players often encounter unexpected and humorous situations. The rocket test flying off the stand and crashing back to the ground is just like the game. Some even call this the most Kerbal event in human spaceflight history, which is a stinging critique. Others say China is now boosting India's space program, an even harsher mockery. Initially, they thought they could laugh at India's backwardness, but now they've embarrassed themselves. China is using video game methods for real space launches, and in the process, they've lost control of the rocket. Originally, if everything had gone smoothly, the Tianlong-3 was supposed to become the first dedicated rocket for deploying China's large-scale satellite internet constellation. However, this serious accident might be the end for Space Pioneer. Such a rudimentary error tells the world our management is a joke. Now, other private aerospace companies might also be scared into silence. The investment environment will deteriorate further. Private aerospace is already a high-risk industry. Now who would dare to invest? In the end, the so-called private aerospace might just be a few state-owned enterprises playing a solo game. The government will undoubtedly tighten controls next, but completely killing off private aerospace is unlikely. The central government still hopes private aerospace can add prestige. However, local officials wanting to protect their positions might push these companies' testing sites to remote areas. In the short term, various tests and flights will likely be frozen. Previously, the CCP turned a blind eye to safety controls to catch up with SpaceX, but now the progress will be delayed by at least a year. But ultimately, does China really need so many private aerospace companies? In a country where basic human rights can't be guaranteed, what's the point of so many high-tech projects? Instead of spending money on rockets that might fall on civilians' heads, these funds would be better used to improve people's livelihoods and raise their standard of living. Unfortunately, the logic of the CCP's governance has never been about serving the people, but about maintaining its rule. Thus, even with such expensive and dangerous vanity projects, they will likely continue. The unexpected first flight of the Tianlong-3 rocket is just another act in the absurd drama under the CCP's rule. From the Great Leap Forwards era of satellites in the sky to today's zero-COVID policy, absurdity seems to have become the norm in this country. In a normal country, such elementary errors would never occur, but in China, a static test can turn into a launch. This is innovation with Chinese characteristics. The CCP constantly brags about being a space power with achievements like Chang'e lunar exploration and the Tiangong space station, but this incident has ruthlessly exposed these claims. Not to mention the technical level, just the basic safety awareness and management standards are still lacking. In the US, such a mistake could lead to the cancellation of the entire project and the dismissal of those responsible. But in China, most likely there will be a superficial investigation and the matter will be left unresolved. This accident has given Made in China a new label: unreliable, unsafe, uncontrollable. If such a basic error can occur with high-tech products like rockets, what about other fields? High-speed rail? Nuclear power plants? This thought sends chills down one's spine. On the international stage, the negative impact of this accident on China's space industry is evident. Western media and netizens have already started mocking China's aerospace technology level because of this incident. Although this accident only involves one private company, it inevitably affects perceptions of China's entire space industry. Jokes aside, people living under the CCP regime can't even obtain the most basic safety assurances. Hopefully, one day, China can escape this absurdity and truly become a country that respects science, values talent, and cares for its people. Until then, this is likely to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts, prepare your popcorn, and let's continue to witness the various wonders under CCP rule.